Hello and welcome back to my channel. It's my pleasure to have you here today. So we're continuing our series on sustainability. Remember, my channel is Sustainability Insights with Grace Fatope, where I aim to make sustainability relatable. So I had a very interesting experience earlier on today. I felt like eating sweet potatoes. I went to the kitchen and checked every single tuber of sweet potato I had, and they were all bad. And it's only been in my house for about a week. When they were purchased, they were fresh. And so I was really upset. Two things got me upset. One, the fact that I was in the mood for sweet potatoes and the sweet potatoes available were bad. And then two, the fact that we had spent so much and we're going to throw out the food. Now, this is really upsetting coming at a time when the cost of living is quite high. So you can imagine the chartered accountant in me calculating the cost of what was going to be thrown out. But then I had no other choice than to throw it out because I don't keep domestic animals, so I couldn't feed it to animals. And when I went online to check how to convert it to compost so that I could use it as manure for flowers, the process I felt was a bit complicated and long drawn out. You had to cover it with leaves, the twigs, different things. All along, I'd always thought that making compost was simply throwing food and keeping it and it would rot and become compost. But apparently it involves a lot of processes and a number of days. And so eventually I decided to throw out the food. But then, being a sustainability enthusiast, it drew my attention to two very pertinent things currently globally. One, the social aspect of the food I had just thrown out. We know that about 800 million people are going without food. They are hungry. And one of the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically SDG 2, is to ensure that there's zero hunger. Zero hunger means that people should have food to be able to eat, and the food should be nutritious. So it's not just about eating, but having adequate nutrition. And that's why globally, especially here in Nigeria, my country, a lot of our foods are fortified with vitamins, just to make sure that every child has access to appropriate nourishment. So that's the first issue. Throwing out food means that somebody else could have eaten this food. And then the other issue is the fact that when food that is wasted and it's decomposed there, it emits methane, which is a huge greenhouse gas warming effect. It has a huge impact on the environment. So here we have food being wasted, and then it also brings about higher greenhouse gas emissions. So I sat down and thought that this couldn't be the right way to go. There has to be a way that we ensure that every food that is meant for human consumption actually gets to a human being. And I did a lot of research, and these are my findings. Number one, the UN Food and Agricultural Organization says that over 30% of food produced for human consumption ends up in waste. So that's a huge amount. That quantity of food can actually feed about 2 billion human beings, and that is twice the number of people that go hungry. So it means that we have to find a mechanism to make sure that the food that gets wasted gets to those who don't have food, and then would have solved the issue of hunger and malnutrition. So how do we achieve this? Let's look at the value chain, the food value chain. It starts at the production process, which is agriculture, where they produce the food. And at that stage in Nigeria, more than 40% of our agricultural products get lost due to post-harvest handling. So between the farm gate and when it gets to the final consumer, at least 40% of it is lost. So it means that in Nigeria, we have to find a way to address the food loss that is happening at the farm gate before it gets to the next stage. And how do we do that? We have really bad roads, which affects the distribution of food. So maybe if we fix the roads, that would also address the fact that the food gets to the next stage quickly and doesn't get spoiled. But then that is outside the control of individuals like you and I. That's the roads have to be fixed by the government. how can the private sector play in that space? Well, interestingly, and a good one, is that Nigeria has a tax incentive targeted at people, organizations who build roads. And so your business or your organization can look at identifying a route that is a distribution network for food and fix that road, but you first have to get approval. Fix the road and then you get a tax credit. So that's money going to solve the issue of zero hunger. And you could use that, incorporate it into your organization so that it is an opportunity that can drive more businesses for you. So that's one way. Another one is that if we have cooling system and proper storage, and the farmers are then able to ensure that at least the foods do not deteriorate quickly, because immediately you harvest, especially for fruits and vegetables, the deterioration process starts. And then another challenge is access to market. Sometimes the farmers just don't have the markets within which to sell this food. So maybe that's an opportunity for somebody to look at how you can provide access to markets to farmers so that even before they harvest, there's already a market to take up at fair prices. Actually, please make sure they are at fair prices, because our farmers are not usually giving fair prices. This is a huge challenge here in Nigeria, so that the farmer knows that at harvest, there's a destination for this commodity he or she has produced, and therefore is willing to harvest them immediately, because sometimes some of these fruits and vegetables are just left to rot on the plants. And then once we fix the road through the tax incentive, at least the food gets to the next stage as soon as possible. So we've looked at the challenges around the production area. Let's now move to the next stage, which is the distribution. We discussed the distribution a little bit when we said fix the road. So one of the issue is the bad road network. Another issue is that we do not have the appropriate infrastructure to move farm produce. So we move them in the same type of vehicles that we use to move every other type of goods. At least that's our situation here in Nigeria. So this is an opportunity for someone to invest in cooling vehicles, cooling vans, so that at least the products are moved from the farm in an appropriate infrastructure, that they get to the next stage without being destroyed. Now, from the production all the way to the distribution that I've been speaking on, is that any loss that occurs in this aspect is known as food loss. So the UN Food and Agriculture Organization defines food loss as deterioration in the quality of food between the production before it gets to the suppliers, the food service providers, and the consumer. So we have thought about how we can address this food loss. Then let's now move to the next level, where it gets to the retailers, who are the suppliers now. Typically, most food, agricultural food in Nigeria, at least a bulk of it, is sold in our markets, not the supermarkets. So I'll focus on the markets. So the food successfully gets to the markets, and the way our markets are, there isn't adequate cooling infrastructure. So you have the food deteriorating fast, and once they're no longer looking appealing in the eyes, when a customer comes to purchase, he wouldn't buy it, and so that food is wasted. Luckily, there is a company who is doing something about that, setting up cooling hubs in markets, and it's in a number of states in Nigeria. So at least it's addressing that issue, but it isn't scaled up to address that issue in every single market in Nigeria. So if we're able to provide more cooling hubs in the market, at least we extend the lifespan of the food, so the food doesn't get to waste. But what about markets where they currently do not have cooling hubs and their food is going to waste? What can they do differently? Maybe they can set up a food bank where people who do not have the resources to buy the food can actually go and pick up this food. At least there's nothing wrong with it. It's not decayed. It's still consumable for humans, but just because it's not aesthetically beautiful, someone who is paying will not pay for that food. But someone who is hungry will eat that food. So if we set up a food bank, so that's something that the Markets Association can think of setting up food banks where people who are less privileged, who do not know where their next meal will come from, can go and pick up this thing and eat it, so that instead of it going to waste and emitting carbon, it can get to somebody who is hungry, and we reduce the number of people who are hungry. So that's something that the markets can think about. Now, if the markets do not have the infrastructure to set up a food bank, maybe individuals, NGOs can look into that, setting up a food bank, making sure that they have an infrastructure to at least keep the food in good condition for a number of days so that people can come and take it. Or you could set up a food restaurant aimed at the less privileged. So you pick up this food that would ordinarily have gone to waste, cook it, and then serve a meal to people who do not know where their next meal will come from. So that's just something to think about. And then the third level, when it gets to us, the consumer, which was what happens to me, that I had to throw out sweet potatoes. There are little things we could do. One, don't buy more than you need. Now, I didn't buy a lot of quantity of sweet potatoes. I just bought adequate for the consumption of my household. But unfortunately, I bought it more than a week ago and it deteriorated. So maybe what I now need to start doing is clearly have a timetable of the day I'm going to eat sweet potato, and make sure that I buy them in such a time that when I'm ready to eat it, it wouldn't have gone bad. Now, this may not be very convenient for a lot of us, myself inclusive. So another thing we could do is we could prep it. Maybe when you bring it from the market, you typically go to the market over the weekend because you're working Monday to Friday. Some of you work Monday to Saturday. You could prep it, peel it, wash it, put it in a freezer bag and put it in the fridge, so that when you're about to eat it, you can bring it out and boil it. That way it wouldn't have spoiled. So that's something you can think about. Another alternative for people who wouldn't even have the time to cook during the week, you could actually cook it over the weekend, freeze it, and then when you're ready to eat it, you bring it out. So now I'm reducing my waste. So the food that I would ordinarily have thrown away, I've prepped it, put it in the fridge, so that when I need to eat it, I bring it out. Something I've always cultivated is not buying more than I need. What I now need to work on is making sure that when I buy something, I prep it, put it in the fridge, and make sure that it doesn't go to waste. And if eventually it goes to waste unavoidably, instead of trashing it like I did today, maybe I will try and ensure I learn how to do the compost, and then I'm able to use it for my flowers. Thank you for spending this time with me. I know this is a very interesting topic and a very lengthy one. Maybe I'll do another series where we look at food waste. But what I've hoped to achieve today is to bring to your consciousness that every decision we make impacts something. So when you throw out food, that is something that could ordinarily have gone to somebody and reduce the number of hungry people in the world. We have over 800 million people who are hungry, and we're throwing out more than 30% of the food produced. So if that 30% is not wasted or lost, it could feed more than twice the number of people that are hungry. So we have that at the back of our mind. And then we're also reducing carbon emissions, because that's bulky food, over 30%, ends up in landmine emitting methane. So we can achieve two things by reducing waste. We reduce carbon emissions, and we ensure that we achieve the UN SDG 2, zero hunger. It's been my pleasure spending this time with you. Thank you for watching. Please like my video, share this message so that a lot of people become more aware of the impact of their eating habits. See you next time.